Alright, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about the internals of an air rifle. Now before we go any further, I want to make sure you understand that I am not a professional at this. I do this just as a hobby. If you modify anything, you do it at your own risk. And you got to really understand, especially in the high pressure air rifles and pistols, that could be very dangerous. And we'll discuss some of that when we're looking at the internals of one. You're also going to realize you're going to avoid warranties, stuff like that. So just let y'all know, it's not on me, so if you do anything, it's on you. All right, let's look at a Springer first. All right, now Springer is probably my least of knowledge on them. But I'm going to show you what I do know. Basically, you're taking a spring and you're collapsing it, and it has a piston on it with a seal. When you pull the trigger, that spring is released and pushed forward. All that air is compressed behind the pellet and shoots it out. Now, how do you modify one? You're really not much to modify. You're just tuning them. You have to take the springs out of it. Most people won't be able to do it unless you build a spring compressor to get it out. This gun, you can actually get the spring out without a compressor. But some of them you have to have a compressor to get it out. And if you don't, if it came out on you, it could fly out and hit you in the face or something, so be careful. But basically, you're going to go in and hone out the cylinder in it, just like you would a car cylinder or whatever, to get a nice good finish in there, so that seal not only seals good, but it also slides very easily. The second thing is a spring guide. If you're compressing a spring and it's in a tube, if it's not completely just straight, it's all kind of bent up. You know how if you ever had a porch door spring that, you know how you can bend it all around into S shapes and stuff like that. If it's in there like that, the energy to push it straight out is wasted trying to push it this way. So if you have a spring guide in there, it helps push everything straight out. And you might tinker with the trigger a little bit on them. The triggers on Springers are a little tougher to work with because it's holding a lot of pressure back. Other than that, I really don't know of much of anything else you can do. Oh, yeah, they make a grease that you put on top of or all over the springs. And if you ever shot a Springer, you've always hear that little swing noise to it. There's a heavy grease that they coat them with, and that helps take some of that out of there. So anyway, that's really all I know on Springer, so I'm not going to say much more on those. So we'll move on to the next thing. Let me get set up for that. Okay. Now this pretty much can cover all the rest of it. We'll start out with a pumper. Now this valve here is a typical valve for a PCP, but a pumper has a different front end on it. And in this front end, it will have a one-way valve. So when you pump it, the air goes in and it can't come back out. There's a one-way valve here. It fills up the reservoir that's inside of here. Then you're once you cock it, your hammer hits the valve, out goes the air. There's not a lot you can modify on it. There is some ways to modify it. It's kind of complicated. You can go in and try to open up the internals a little bit without messing it up, get a little bit more volume. There's some guys that know how to do it, and I don't, that you can actually pump it up, and once you fire it, it'll actually still have a little bit left. Normally a multi-pump is called a dump valve, so when you hit it, all the air is gone. But there's some ways to mod it, and I say I'm not good at it, but I'm just letting y'all know that there is ways out there. Other than that, there's not a lot you can do on the pumpers. Okay, so we'll go away with that. All right, next thing is like a CO2, like in this pistol here. The valve is sitting right here. Should be right, yeah, right in here. Anyway, when the hammer hits the valve on this one, well, let me go back. The CO2 is sitting up here, and on the front of the valve on this one has a different front end on it. It has a seal right on front of it, and depending on the make of your gun, will have different ways of poking a hole in the CO2 cartridge. On the Crosman's, it's built into the valve. There's a little needle on it, so when the hammer hits it, it opens it up. That's pretty much how one of those works. So what I want to show you pertains to all of them pretty much is how a PCP works. Okay, here's the components of a PCP. You have your fill. This will be on the front of the gun. Some of them are, depends on your model at where how it fills, but this is from a Benjamin Discovery. Here's your air tube. Most of them are made out of some type of 4140, some type of chromoly. This is screwed into the end of it. Obviously this is the wrong size. This is a piece I had left over from one project. Some people are making them out of titanium. Basically that goes in there. Your valve will be in here somewhere, depending on the length of your tube. Your hammer, your spring, and then the capture of the spring, and then your transfer port. Let me move this back out of the way here. Now, when you fill this thing up with pressure, it depends on what you've got it rated at, and most of the time the rating comes from how the valve is pinned into the tube. This CO2 one only has one screw holding that valve in. This one has 3 screws in it, and it depends on the type of screw you got in it and the quality of the screw. So you'll have this with air in between it. Now, this is where it gets a lot of scientific to it. When you fill this tube full of air, depending on how large this is, you have to calculate it, how much pressure is being pushed, trying to push this thing out of the end of that tube. Only thing that's holding it is those little threads. So you got to know that those threads, what the shear strength on your threads are, what the shear strengths on your how you have it pinned. Now, whatever you do, if you have a, say you got a Benjamin Discovery, they're rated at 2,000 psi. Do not fill past that, ever. The guns are rated for that. That's all you should go. Never exceed the manufacturer's PSI rating. What we're going to talk about today is kind of how one of these works. Okay, so you got this all filled up with air. You have a hammer, and you have a spring to here, and then you have a deal to catch it here. When you cock the hammer back, and then you pull the trigger and let it go, the hammer comes flying up and hits that valve, cracks it open. It depends on how much pressure you have inside of the gun, and determine your weight of your hammer and the spring pressure of your hammer. Okay, so once you've cracked it open, the air is gonna come out of this hole right here and go up to your barrel through this transfer port. It's got a little bitty hole in it. I don't know if you can see that hole or not, but comes up, goes through the barrel behind the pellet, pushes it out. That's the basics of a pumper, a CO2, or a high pressure air. This is a basic, simple design. There's other designs out there too. There's other valves out there. There's pressure valence valves and stuff like that. But to try to get more out of your gun, get the velocities up, get your shot count better, whatever you want to do, your what they call a bell curve. If you want to change all that, there's ways of doing that. Let's just talk about trying to make it more efficient. Okay, now guys that race cars or know anything about cars, what makes horsepower? And 99% of them will tell you it's in the heads. If it don't flow, you don't make horsepower. Here's your valve. That's a poppet valve. This would be considered your head. It goes in there and it seals inside of here. I don't know if we can get this on camera or not. I'll try. Try to get up closer. You see down in there, that valve is nearly the same diameter as the ID of the valve head. So what some people will do is, first thing is, you can see on this one, you can see where it seats right there. They'll turn this down some, get a little bit more clearance in between the valve head and the valve body. All right, second thing is this thing, after that air comes around that face, it's going to come into this area, which is right in here, and then you got to turn and go up. I don't know if I'm on camera or not. Let me get set back down here. yeah, the air's got to come in, turn and go up, and then turn again and go down the barrel. So what a lot of people do will go in here and open this hole up, smooth it out, make it roundish if they can, 45 area, so that the air doesn't have to just go straight, boom, straight up like that. Just getting better flow. Next thing they'll do is on the transfer port. They'll open it up as max as they can. Now this particular one has an O-ring that sits right here, so you can't go too big, because then you won't have a way for the O-ring to seal. But you can do, open them up. Now if you got one that you could really open to really big, the thing is you can only go 70% of your caliber diameter. If you go any bigger than that, because that's in the bottom of the barrel, the pellet could actually fall into the transfer port as you're putting it in. Okay, now that you've established the flow through the valve and transfer port, this is a standard bolt. See how short it is on the end? You can get ones that are a little longer. Push that pellet on past the port a little further, which will help airflow go through better. Alright, so next thing you can do, I want to talk more about this too. As I was saying, on like this here, how much pressure is being pushed on this is also being pushed on this. So by reducing that diameter, that helps the hammer be able to open it up easier too. So now you can go in and try to modify your piston, and you got to get into specifics of that, and I'm not going to on this. Basically, you have a hammer at a certain weight moving with a spring at a certain velocity. The spring will make the hammer move at a certain velocity to hit the valve, crack it open, come back and close everything up. Now you can get it to where if you don't get it right, the hammer, get this put back together here, the hammer can strike it, open the valve up, but the pressure from this side is pushing on it so hard that it pushes the hammer back, compresses the spring again, goes back and hits it again. It can sit there and do it 3 or 4 times before it finally runs out of energy and can't pop it anymore. So you got to have the right hammer weight and the right spring rate. Now, another way to modify most of the factory ones are rated for just enough to open it up. You can go in and change the spring to a heavier spring. That'll give you a little bit, crack the valve open a little bit more, and the dwell time will be a little bit longer. That way a little longer amount of air come out too. One of the next things you can do without changing the spring is make a spring guide for it. Same thing as in the Springer air rifle. This one's not real long because you got to be able to have room to collapse the spring. But that also, this little section up here will help compress the spring a little bit, and it's also giving you a smoother, straighter acceleration of the hammer. Now, most of the time, this is the end cap. Most of the time they don't have anything on them. What done was, and this is just common practice, it's not something I've done, you build the spring guide, and then you take this end cap and you drill and tap a hole in it. Then you put a screw in there, and then you can adjust how much tension you're putting on that when you cock it. You don't ever want to completely compress it when you cock it though, because then you can put a set in the spring. Those are the ways you can modify these things. They're just simple modifications. Just think of it as airflow. You're just trying to get it to flow out. You know, when you go into trying to actually tune it, and tuning it is to get the best bell curve there is. Now, what's a bell curve? Okay, it goes back again to the air pressure in between here and being applied to your valve. If you have 3,000 psi on it, it takes X amount of energy to crack the valve open. And every time you crack that valve open, the pressure here drops a little bit. So that means there's less pressure pushing on the valve. So that means the hammer can open it up a little bit more. And as that pressure in your tube keeps dropping, the hammer can open it easier and easier. Once you get to a peak point and the air pressure in your tube is dropping, well, now it can't push the air out the hole or out of the valve. So now it starts dropping down more because you just don't have the pressure now. So you can adjust it. So I've seen some of them do this, and then you got some that's slight curve, and that's what you want on an unregulated gun. Now, if you have a regulated gun, you would have a regulator somewhere in this tube. They make them for all kinds of guns. You can go out there and buy aftermarket ones to slide into your gun. Some guns I already have it on there. If you have a regulator here, then you'll have to have an area between the regulator and the valve called the plenum, and it has to be big enough to accommodate how much power you're trying to put out. It's like 1 cc per foot-pound of energy you're trying to do. So you'd have to do more calculating math. There's a lot of math in all this stuff. So in the regulator, what it does is it's always got that constant pressure, same exact pressure. It never drops until the air in the tube gets down to the regulator pressure. So it's always the same, so it keeps the curve pretty straight. What else? Well, they say that this is the basic internals of a gun. Not trying to be any kind of fancy. People can get really crazy with this stuff. You know, if that's what you want to do, study it. Get on some of the forums with guys that talk this stuff all day long, and you'll learn how it's done. Just do some research if you want to do any modifications, and just take it easy. Be careful. Anytime you want to work on one of them, make sure you discharge all the air. You know, it's just like make sure the gun's unloaded before you start working on it. You know, before you clean it, because think about it. This thing is sitting in this tube, or this one's screwed into this tube. That pressure in between there is pushing on that thing, trying to push that thing out. And that's a large projectile if it came out of there. Either way, this one's pointed back at you. It can hurt you. Be very, very careful in doing any modifications. Alright, I think that's all I'm going to do on this video. So, anyway, thanks for watching.